In the quiet town of South Shields, England, nestled by the North Sea, an unsuspecting family found themselves trapped in a nightmare, one that defied logic, science, and even faith. What began as minor disturbances soon escalated into an all-out psychological and physical attack. This is the terrifying true story of the South Shields Poltergeist, a case that remains one of the most chilling hauntings ever documented. The events began in December 2005. A young couple, Mark and Marianne, had recently moved into their modest home with their 3-year-old son, Robert. They were like any other family, hopeful, excited, and unaware that their house was already occupied by something far beyond human comprehension. At first, the signs were subtle. Doors would creak open in the dead of night, only to slam shut when no one was near. Keys, wallets, and other small objects would disappear, sometimes reappearing in bizarre places, like the top of bookshelves or inside locked cabinets. They dismissed it as forgetfulness, perhaps even the mischievous antics of their toddler. But as the weeks passed, the disturbances became impossible to ignore. Toys, especially Robert's favorites, took on a sinister role. They wouldn't just be misplaced, they would move on their own. Mark and Marianne would wake up to find stuffed animals placed in bizarre, ritualistic formations. One night, Robert's rocking horse was found balancing on the very top of the staircase railing, an impossible feat, as if something had deliberately set a trap. But the playfulness soon turned to aggression. One evening, as Marianne sat alone in the living room, a small toy car shot across the floor with unnatural force, striking her hard in the leg. She barely had time to react before an entire shelf of books crashed onto the floor without explanation. Dr. W. Rotson, a famed paranormal investigator, later commented on the case. When I first heard of the disturbances, I was skeptical. However, upon witnessing the events firsthand, it became evident that this was a genuine and malevolent presence. As the days turned into weeks, the entity became more emboldened. Loud bangs would erupt from within the walls, shaking the house like an earthquake. Ice-cold gusts of air would rush through rooms, sending shivers down their spines. The family began waking up with strange bruises and scratches on their bodies, as if something had attacked them in their sleep. But the worst of it was Robert. The once cheerful 3-year-old became withdrawn, refusing to sleep alone. He spoke of a shadowy figure he called the Man, a presence he claimed would stand at the foot of his bed at night, watching, waiting. Darren W. Ritson, one of the paranormal investigators who studied the case, later revealed,
"We documented various phenomena. Objects levitating, sinister messages appearing on walls, and even interactions that suggested the entity was intelligent and mocking."
Those messages, scrawled in crayon, were enough to shake even the most hardened skeptics. Phrases like, "I'm back and die," would appear overnight, sometimes written on walls, sometimes on the child's whiteboard. The most unsettling, a note found on the couple's bed, written in Mark's own handwriting, but he had no memory of writing it. It read, "You are mine." Mark, already on edge, faced his worst terror, yet when he was physically dragged out of bed in the middle of the night, Marianne woke to find him clawing at the floor, an unseen force pulling him by the ankles toward the hallway. The struggle lasted mere seconds, but when it was over, Mark was left trembling, covered in deep red scratches. At this point, They knew they needed help. Paranormal researchers Darren Ritson and Mike Hallowell were called in, hoping to bring clarity to the chaos. They set up cameras, audio recorders, and other equipment to document the activity. What they captured was beyond chilling. Mike Hallowell later described his experience, stating,
"The level of activity in that house was unprecedented. We witnessed chairs moving, objects disappearing and reappearing, and even heard voices that couldn't be traced to any source. But the most disturbing evidence came one night, when a wooden chair moved across the room on its own. It didn't slide, it lifted. It hovered for mere seconds before crashing to the floor, inches away from one of the investigators."
Despite overwhelming evidence, skeptics refused to believe. Some accused the family of orchestrating a hoax. Others suggested psychological explanations, dismissing it all as mass hysteria. But for Mark, Marianne, and Robert, who lived this nightmare, there was no doubt. Something unseen, something malicious, had set its sights on them. Over time, as attention around the case grew, the activity began to subside. The entity, whatever it was, seemed to feed on fear, and when fear was replaced with defiance, it gradually faded into silence. But did it ever truly leave? Or did it simply move on, waiting for its next victims? What do you think? Was this all an elaborate hoax? Or did something truly sinister haunt the South Shields home? Let me know in the too. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there's always another nightmare waiting to